found. And this whole world seems cold and empty.
Welcome back to The Right Hook. Thank you for joining us tonight. You may recognize that we're playing the same song that we played last week where we saluted Kid Rock. That's because my hard drive crashed, and it was the only sound clips that I have available. So we ended the year with Kid Rock. We're starting the new year with Kid Rock. Kid Rock rocks. That being said, our next guest, been hearing a lot about this guy. He's like, this new, like, the new Republican rock star running for Congress in California, down in Stockton, the 209. Jeb Bush endorsed him. Nikki Haley endorsed him. But the most interesting thing about him is that he's currently not old enough to actually sit on Congress because he's only 24. He won't be 25 until December, just before he gets sworn in. His name is Ricky Gill, running in the California 9. And here he comes. We usually start off each of our guests the same first two-part question. Who are you, and just why the hell do you want to run for Congress?
Great. Well, hey, John, my name is Ricky Gill. I'm a candidate for Congress in California's 9th District, and I'm running because politics has really failed this community. This district is facing double the national unemployment. There's a lot of hardship here, and people have seen a dysfunctional political system completely turn its back on them. Here's what I mean by that. John, in this district today, there's not a single state or federal legislator that lives here, and yet we have issues that have left people feeling that they're in a very precarious spot. We have water rights that are somewhat uncertain. We have, as I mentioned, a double the national unemployment rate. We have an economy that is really trickling along, if that, and my opponent has been on the wrong side of every big issue that we faced, including the failed stimulus and the president's health care reform that really didn't fix anything.
I want to get to specific issues in a second, but one thing that I find living in New York, and generally with California and New York, they're the two most liberal states. We flip-flop. Sometimes California is the second worst, and we're the worst. And in some cases, you're the worst, we're second worst. Yet it's still dominated by Democrat control. Mm-hmm. What's it like, and how do you plan a campaign trying to run as a Republican in an area in a state where, even though I know you're right and you know we're right, sometimes the voters don't really think the same way.
Sure. Well, this is a district that's largely grounded in the Central Valley, John. So if there's a part of California where the Republican brand is still alive, relevant, and competitive, and a real force, it's here. So this is a classic swing district. It's one that's very winnable. Just to give your listeners a sense, President George W. Bush won re-election in this district. He won more votes than John Kerry did, and so I think that suggests how susceptible folks are to our message here. It's certainly winnable. Having said that, being a California Republican, a lot of people think it's a little bit of an oxymoron. I would contest that. I would say there's a resilience that comes to kind of operating in this place and being in this environment. It makes you tougher. You got to defend yourself and makes your conviction stronger. And I want to be a friend of the entrepreneur. I want folks to know the American dream is still alive and well. I want public education to be about the students and not other organized interests. I want the red tape to be cut. I want us to understand that taxes are not a panacea for every social ill that we have in this society. So that's the kind of approach I'm bringing in. My opponent's voted 92% of the time with Nancy Pelosi. She's a coastal figure. She's from the city of San Francisco, and he's got some explaining to do in this Central Valley district where it's pretty rural, and it's a different take on politics, John.
Okay. As you travel the district, what are some of the top issues that say, you get elected in November, starting January 1st, you're in Congress? What are some of the top issues affecting your district that you want to start working on right away?
Well, this is a district, John, that is largely rural. Our predominant industry here is farming. We grow everything from wine grapes to sweet corn and cherries and asparagus. And my opponent, as I mentioned earlier, John, he lives in the Bay Area. As a result of redistricting, I want to bring this up. It's a key issue. As a result of redistricting, he still lives in the Bay Area, 70 miles outside of the district. So he is someone who's kind of an outside force, and he's turned his back on the agriculture industry here. In fact, he voted against those 3 free trade agreements with South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. They recently passed Congress. They were great for farmers. My opponent, Jerry McNerney, voted against them, and it's because he was held captive to the special interest groups that are crippling Washington. He turned his back on this community, and I think he's just out of touch. That's what happens when you live outside the district in the Bay Area and not in the Valley. But there's something else, John. People want trust restored to the political process. We in California passed a redistricting commission so that we could take redistricting out of the hands of politicians. It's something that a lot of people are aware of. My opponent paid a lobbyist, a Democratic lobbyist, $20,000 to improperly influence a citizens redistricting commission. If that's not a suggestion of broken politics, I don't know what is. So I'm fighting to restore local representation. That matters to folks here first and foremost. They want a congressman from this community, not one who's treating them as kind of their political playground. And folks want a congressman who's serious about the economy on issues of trade and reducing spending and making sure that regulations are brought under control. So, like I said, I want to be a friend of those who are making progress in the private sector. I trust the private sector more than I do the public sector, and getting this economy going is hugely important. Our unemployment rate, as I mentioned, is nearly double the national rate. So there's no greater priority than making sure this economy is working for ordinary folks here.
And probably the biggest issue, where it's an issue now, it'll be an issue if you get elected, it'll be an issue long after we're both gone, the debt. It's out of control now, and people are only finally starting to take a look at and see how much damage it's going to cause and be worse to, like, our kids and our grandkids.
Yeah.
January 1st rolls around. You're sworn into Congress. What are some of the things you think we need to do to, like, bring down the debt, both short-term and long-term?
Well, John, this means a lot to me as a candidate. I admit I'm pretty unconventional. I'm actually for your listeners, I'm turning 25 next year. So I look at this through the prism of not just what's responsible, but what's morally right for the next generation. Even for those young people who can't even vote, we are conveying this debt to them without their choice, without their participation in the process. I've been, from day one of my campaign, I have advocated for a balanced budget amendment. We were on the brink of passing a balanced budget amendment about 15 years ago. There's no reason why that honest discussion shouldn't be happening in Washington today. The other thing that I want to do is I want a top-down review of what's happening in the federal government. I think we need more sunset provisions so you don't have laws that are on the books forever. As Ronald Reagan said, the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a federal program. That's the kind of stuff that has to end. The incentive for a program, as you know, John, or an agency, is to spend all the money that they're allocated. We have to reorient the federal government so that there's an incentive to save and not just burn through cash. The agency mentality is just to basically the size of your budget is the strength or importance that you have. That's pretty skewed in my book. So I want to be a budget hawk. I want to be the kind of person who's going to fight wasteful spending because it matters to the next generation, and credible deficit reduction is a way to bring this economy back. When the government's spending too much, you're competing then with entrepreneurs for capital. And when you're competing with entrepreneurs for capital, job creation stalls. When the public sector gets too big, the private sector shrinks, and it's that kind of approach that I think more people need to take to Washington. That's the common sense that's motivating me.
And you had mentioned only being 24. One of the things we like to focus on the show is, trying to figure out why more young people aren't more into Republican Party, conservative politics, and how to get them more involved, particularly after, for at least the last 10 years or so, not a lot of state parties are really known for taking the time to build the bench. So even if they were interested, there's nowhere for them to go. If you could just speak a little bit, what's been your experience dealing with some of the elder set of the Republican Party? And also, how do you feel we could reach out to other people, both your age and my age, to get them, explain to them why the Republican Party is the way to go? You need to get more involved.
Right. Well, my experience with folks is if your message is sound, John, you're going to be able to connect. You're going to reach people across the spectrum. And, I find folks young and old are kind of connecting with us, and it's a great honor to be their voice. I mean, no one pretends to be perfect. I certainly don't, but I am in this district that vector for fiscal responsibility, job creation, a politics that's more transparent, and you're really, not touched by special interests. My opponent, for example, John, here's a way to get to young people. I talk to young people all the time, and I just appeal to their sense of fairness. I say, look, my opponent doesn't live in this district. He abused and corrupted the redistricting process. He took a donation from the Solyndra lead investor, George Kaiser, and then turned around and promoted the idea of that company getting a $500 million federal loan, which was not repaid. That was taxpayer abuse. That's taxpayer fraud. I'm not for any of those things. And I think when you appeal to common sense, you find a heart and a home wherever you go. So that's one thing we're finding, John. I mean, I'm a young candidate, but we speak everybody's language figuratively. And my advice to the Republican Party is we've got to go out there and recruit candidates who maybe are a little unconventional. I know it takes there's somewhat of a chance that you have to take, but I do believe it's very important that we reach out and kind of build this party so that because our message is only as good as our messengers, and I think that starts with building the bench.
One of the biggest issue for young people in New York, which I can only assume it's the same in California, since economically you guys are in about as good shape as we are, is cost of living and be able to stay in the state. Our parents raised us here, their parents raised them there, yet a lot of us find that because we can't afford to live here anymore. We want to move into Florida, move into cheaper states, and leaving the state where our entire family is. What are some things which I know in some cases is more of a local issue than it is like a national issue, because I know you're running for Congress, but what are some things you think could be done to help younger families so we have the opportunity to raise our families where we were raised and where like our parents were raised, and basically where our roots are?
I'm so happy you asked this question, John, because when I talk about the economy, one thing I say that really strikes a chord in this district is that the economy is in such shambles here in this particular district. I mean, I know there's a lot of complaints around the country, but it is twice as bad here. Things are so degenerated economically. Young people, in particular, they go to college, elsewhere. After high school, they leave. They do not come back. And it's a seminal leadership failure that problem has been allowed to just continue. I mean, here's what I'm advocating for. Any way we bring the economy back is a way to bring young people back. I talked about trade for agriculture products. John, we grow $2.5 billion of ag product roughly every year in this district. If we have more export markets or access to export markets, that industry is going to grow. People in San Joaquin are able to come back here. I think we need kind of more skilled immigration for job creation here. We educate a lot of students at top-flight universities, and we send them back off to their home countries. I think those are job creators. They could be driving new innovation here. We need small business to have access to credit. We need energy independence. You talk about that pipeline. It's really beyond me that President Obama is opposed to that pipeline. That's energy independence that drives down the cost of energy. It makes us safer and more secure, makes life a little more livable for a younger family, particularly in this district. So these are things that we need to do to make sure that young people feel that they can actually start a family and live a life that's comparable to the one their parents led. And that's what you just hinted at, John, was quality of life. And that is something we talk about every single day on this campaign.
A lot of people listening to the show right now are considering careers in politics themselves. And, the only time you really get to see that much behind-the-scenes stuff is when, like, fictional movies or shows like The West Wing. Right. What were some of the things that went into you launching your campaign, and what was your first day like? All right, this is day one, this is Monday, my campaign starts today. What were some things that you did?
Well, it was interesting, John. A lot of people say, what's the urgency of now in this campaign? And actually that's something that Dr. Martin Luther King used to talk about, the urgency of now. The urgency of now in this campaign is that in this district today, we are the most underrepresented people in America. There wasn't a single state or federal legislator who lived in this newly drawn district, including my opponent, who's now in Congress. You know all about his failures, but he was caught manipulating the redistricting process. Public trust has sunk into new lows here, and people in the community came to me, and they said, Rick, what'd you think about this? So we first put an exploratory committee together, and these community elders, they were farmers and just a bunch of folks from every different industry. They came together, and they said, we think you should do this. So I only did it after they suggested that it was a wise thing to do, and we announced. But it's been a real trip, I can tell you, John. I was humbled to have Governor Nikki Haley from South Carolina campaign for me in November. Next week, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush is going to be campaigning for me. I'm absolutely humbled and thrilled to have him. And just interesting folks come out of the woodwork. This is such a campaign grounded in this community. There's a consensus here that we have had leaders who have failed us and neglected us, and there's something hopefully transcendent about this. We just sat down with, not too long ago, with someone you're probably interested in, Nick Diaz. He's a UFC fighter, and Nick sat down, and we had lunch, and he said, you know what, Ricky, you're standing up for this community. I stand up for Stockton. I can train elsewhere, but I train here. You could be elsewhere too, Ricky, but you're fighting for this community. There was just something that appealed to him about that. And he said, Ricky, I fight for Stockton in the ring, but you're fighting in your own way for this, and I appreciate that. So we're collaborating on some initiatives together. It's been real exciting, John, but in a way, this campaign is kind of a metaphor for the American story. It's about sacrifice and standing up for a community that desperately needs something different.
And speaking of Jeb Bush and Nikki Haley, is there any because I've been wondering if there's any added pressure, because, all right, you're 24. Technically, you won't even be old enough to assume the job until, just before you get sworn in. And yet you have Nikki Haley endorsing you. You've got Jeb Bush endorsing you. You have all these people saying, total Republican rock star, this is the one to watch. Does it add any extra pressure to, when you're running your campaign? Do you feel like you have to change things up at all, or is it really just, day by day?
Well, I try to take the short view and also the long view, but to the extent there is pressure to perform for this community. These are the folks that count. I mean, John, these are the folks who have seen, their neighbors get eviction notices because of the foreclosure catastrophe. These are the folks who see their young ones go off to college and they can't come back and find a job here. That's the heartache that I feel the pressure to address. So, everything else is superfluous. It's on top of that, but it's not really the sort of end game here. And it's the most humbling thing when you get a thank you letter in the mail from a prospective constituent. They say, Ricky, thank you for doing what you're doing. Maybe it's a Facebook message, it's a tap on the shoulder when you're in the grocery store, and they just say, Ricky, thanks for stepping up. Nick Diaz did it in his way, and Jeb Bush is going to do it in his way, and it's just a humbling thing. No one pretends to be perfect, John, or infallible, but you can claim to have stepped up, and there was a leadership moment here. And, this is a community that needs a victory. It's much bigger than any person.
Well, Ricky Gill, running for Congress in California, and I believe the youngest person to run for Congress ever. If people want to get more involved, find out more information, how can they go about doing so?
They can visit our website, John. I'd be thrilled to have them do that. They can visit us at www.rickygill.com. That's RICKYGILL.com. There's a media tab there, and they can kind of keep tabs on us there, or alternatively, make a donation. That's the best way to get involved from a distance. I went to college, John, on the East Coast, so I have some ties out there, but if you can't vote for me, you can certainly donate online, and I'd be grateful for anybody's support.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us on the show tonight. Good luck out in the campaign trail, and we will talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks, John.
Okay. That was Ricky Gill, congressional candidate in California, and we'll be right back.